You're obviously associated with one of the most iconic organizations in sports with the Chicago Bulls. Do you have your own flu game?
Somebody wrote about one, and they said this was Adam Amin's flu game. It was 2016. I was doing it's funny you mentioned Stanford. I was originally scheduled to I was doing the Friday night college football package for ESPN that year. And we were originally scheduled to do Stanford and Washington. This is when Christian McCaffrey was at Stanford, and they were really, really good. And it ended up being, week 3 or week 4, something like that game. And it was a big one. It was going to be a top 10 game.
Wow.
And the rest of the ESPN slate that weekend wasn't particularly good. We didn't have that very many games that had a lot of pop to them, a lot of sizzle. So as often is the case when you work in, high level broadcasting, whatever crew on the hierarchy is above you, they might end up getting that game or getting that game assigned. So for a couple of weeks, we're looking forward to this game. And naturally, and rightfully so, I understand why, it gets taken away. So we get reassigned to BYU against Toledo in Provo, Utah on a Friday night.
Wow.
And it's myself, Mack Brown, and Molly McGrath. And we're like, all right, well, that's too bad. We didn't get to do the Stanford Washington game. So be it. We'll do this one. We'll do the heck out of this one. So unfortunately for Mack, who would also he'd do Friday night games with me and Molly, and then he'd get on the first flight on Saturday morning to go to New York and be on set for the ABC studio show. And the next day, Texas, Mack's former team, and Charlie Strong were slated to play right around, at the noon ABC slot, the Eastern time slot. So they wanted Mack in studio for that game. And they said, wow, Mack, you better be in that chair because we got Texas coming up and we need you to talk about it. So Seattle, if we're doing the game in Washington, sure, that's a red-eye flight to Atlanta. You get in about 5 a.m., 6 a.m. flight. You're in New York before 9 a.m., and you're going to be on the air at 11 o'clock for that game. No problem. From Provo, Utah, the last flight out to get to Atlanta is about 1:20 in the morning. That means you have to be at the airport through security by a certain time, probably by 12 o'clock, whatever it may be. So we're thinking Mack may have to leave this game and we may not be done with it. And the thought process was, well, let's hope and pray that we get kind of a blowout game just for his sake. Maybe there's a couple minutes left and the game's decided and he can slip out the back door, no problem. Well, we get one of the probably 20 best college football games of the entire season. It's 21-21 at one point, and it's a shootout, and it's going to go deep into the night in Provo. And we get to about 11:45 at night, and we are in the middle of like late third quarter in what is a 1-point game, and I think it's like 42-41. This is a phenomenal college football game. And we've got phones ringing in the truck saying Mack better get his ass on a plane because we need him. So our producer and I have a conversation about it, and we're like, what do we do here? And he's like, well, we can't lie to people because if all of a sudden Mack stops talking, they're going to think he had a heart attack and he's being escorted out of the booth. We got to show that he's okay and send him off. So I was like, all right, let's do it. So we came on camera. We basically said, well, sorry we lose you right now, pal, but we're not going to see your smiling face talking about Texas in the morning if you don't head out right now. And Mack was upset. He was legitimately upset about this because he would be insulted if he were a coach of one of these teams.
Totally.
He made it very clear to ESPN, you better make sure these schools know that this was not my decision. And he has far too much integrity to ever let that happen. So I love that man to death. But Mack has to leave. So with 11 minutes left, Molly McGrath and myself are left to our own devices. Molly's on the field and did yeoman's work on that broadcast, came up huge with great insight, great stories, was right on top of a key penalty that took place late. And I, by myself in the booth, along with my spotter and statistician, Bill Garrity and Ed Svita, who are still my guys to this day, help me through doing this was my Vin Scully homage. This was Vin's last year. This is like late September of 2016. So Vin was about to hang it up, I think, after this particular season. So this was my homage to Vin, doing a solo fourth quarter on a football broadcast, but again, with help and obviously with Molly down on the field. And the game goes right down to the wire. Logan Woodside drops a snap on a 2-point conversion, picks it up and flings it to the end zone, and they get lucky and they get a lead. They take a 1-point lead with less than a minute to go. BYU marches all the way down the field, and Rhett Almond hits a 19-yard field goal at the horn to win the game. And it was written about a couple years later from one of the Mack writers, the Mid-American Conference writers, and said, "That was your flu game. Can I write about that?" And I said, "All right, that was my flu game."
Love that. That's amazing. Yeah, no, I mean, you handled it beautifully. And that's the jinx, the moment you want it to be a quick game.
Yes. We doomed ourselves as baseball broadcasters and writers.
Yes.
And anybody in baseball knows as soon as you start talking about the time of the game, that thing is going to go in the complete opposite direction that you're hoping for.
Even with the new rules, I was like, oh, this isn't going to be a long one. And then boom, we have the longest 3 hour and 20-minute game of the season.
Of course.